Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Thank you to everybody who has joined us today. My name is Melissa Rogers, and I am the Director of Business Development for Heritage Property Management Services. And today we have the privilege of hosting an event that is actually affecting all of us and our community associations throughout the industry. Today, this class is going to be open to anybody and everybody in the community association management profession. So in today's class, you will hear information inclusive and active of all of the ever-changing updates related to COVID-19 and the 2020 pool season. They are in no means, and I say this very nicely, they are in no means a supplement or an exchange to your attorney's opinion on your specific community's operations. It is imperative that all associations maintain open dialogue with their attorney and their management company for best practices and legal opinions. So please also seek out the CDC and the Georgia Health Department websites for direct support on all information related to COVID-19. As we get started, we're going to do a few housekeeping items for all of you joining us today. This event is being recorded, and you will all be receiving a copy of this event inclusive of all of the slides that you will be seeing today as well. You are all in listen only mode today, which means that you are going to have to communicate with us by way of submitting your questions in the upper right hand corner text box. It should say Q&A on the section for you. We do ask that if it's possible, you hold all of your questions until Craig has had an opportunity to complete his presentation. Hopefully, it's highly likely that he will answer these questions for you by the time that we get through the presentation. I will say that this is only a 1-hour event, so we do ask that everybody be courteous and very cognizant of the time when we do ask for questions in the Q&A section. If we did not get to your question, please don't be concerned. You can reach out to me or Craig directly, and we will be able to go ahead and answer those questions for you offline. We have provided a link to our first class as well that will be available to all of you either a little bit after today's class or on all of our, I believe the Sears webpage as well as Heritage's webpage. And as a quick reminder for those of you who have not joined us for our first class in April, we just want to let you know that Heritage previously had a scheduled class with Sears Pool. And so what we decided to do is we exchanged the in-person experience and we extended it to a virtual environment. And the reason why we did this is because we have the capability to host a lot of people on our webinar platform. And so we really just wanted this to be an opportunity where everybody could come together and have some shared educational resource. It's just another opportunity for us to get this content out to everybody because we're all affected by it. So that being said, thank you again to everybody who's joined us again now for the second time. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. We hope you enjoy what we've got lined up for you today. And I now present Craig Sears from Sears Pools.
Thank you so much, Melissa, for that generous introduction, and thank you to Heritage for the platform to share this information. So I just want to preface my comments again, the way Melissa did, that this is in no way legal advice. This is just best practices and tips that I've come aware of through my own research, and I'm happy to share with others. We're all kind of wading through this together and trying to get our pools open for 2020. And I think we have people tuned in from all over the country. So some of the advice or guidance that we'll be talking about today will be specific to Georgia. Some of it will be relevant to everything. So I will try to point out where that is valid, and we'll go from there. But let's go ahead and go to the first slide. And part of the purpose of this too is if you didn't see the last webinar, it was about a month ago, and we only knew a little bit of what was going on at that point. A lot has happened in this month, and so in this webinar, we're going to try to give as specific of guidance and tips as we can, keeping in mind that every community association is different, and you know your community association better than anybody. So today's May 27th, and where are we? Well, Governor Kemp's executive order and the GPDH guidance remain in effect through the end of this month. I put a link on there for you if you need to access that guidance later. And unless extended or amended, conditions will expire on June 1. So we're going to talk about that in more detail as well. So where are we with the inspection process? So most inspections now have been completed for Cobb, Cherokee, Douglas, and Fayette counties. Those counties were conducting inspections the entire time. And there is no pre-opening inspection required for Gwinnett, Forsyth, or Paulding. But for Fulton and DeKalb, they are just started to schedule and complete inspections within the last week. And so they are really behind the other counties. So just if you're in Fulton or DeKalb, please be patient and know that it's going to take a little bit longer for your pool to open versus some of the other counties. Next slide, please. So let's talk about some operational guidance tips. One thing that we have done, and we've got the link in there to this as well, we created this link for our clients, but really anybody can use it. And this is an online questionnaire that helps you step through the guidance in the governor's executive order, as well as the Georgia DPH guidance, to formulate a thorough plan and consider all the key areas that most associations need to consider. So these include things like, what is your target open date? If you have staff, when do you want your staff to start? What will the mask policy be for your patrons? Do you want them to required to wear a mask, or will it be recommended? The lost and found policy. How would you like your lost and found to be handled? Do you want that collecting, or do you want it trashed on a daily or biweekly frequency? What will your guest policy be? Will you allow guests or not? What is your new max bather load? Now we're going to talk about that in greater detail in a minute. The max bather load is not required to have that in the guidance. It's just something that helps you manage your property, helps you manage your facility if you know what that max bather load should be. COVID-19 signage, which is mandatory. If you're using a reservation system, what that reservation system looks like and what your policies are going to be around that, and your furniture policy. We're going to talk about each of these things in a little bit more detail, but these are all areas that the questionnaire that I mentioned cover and will help you step through that plan creation. And then COVID-19 point of contact. So each community needs to assign a point of contact for COVID-19 issues. So what does that mean? If somebody claims that they got sick, or if somebody gets sick while they're either on property or, let's say, several days after visiting the property, they need to contact that point of contact, and that point of contact needs to know what the proper procedures and plans are from that point forward. So depending upon whether it happens live on that day or whether it's days after, that plan may vary a little bit. Temperature checks. We talked about temperature checks in our previous webinar, and the guidance on that has changed a little bit. So initially, what we were recommending was temperature checking everyone as they came in the gate. The newer guidance now is saying that that's really not necessary, it's not required, and what we're recommending right now to clients is that you ask patrons to self-administer a temperature check before they come to the pool, and we are also asking our lifeguards and staff to self-administer a temperature check before they come to the pool as well. And if anyone has a temperature of 100.4 or higher, they should not come to the pool that day and should stay home and follow CDC guidance on self-quarantining. Part of the reason for this change in guidance is that the taking of temperatures is often seen as a medical procedure, and the information that is collected during that can be protected under HIPAA laws. And so if that is not handled correctly, then you risk opening up the association to additional liability if you're taking the temperatures of patrons as they're coming in. So let's go to the next slide, please. So what are some physical distancing strategies? So we need to have physical distancing at the pool if it's going to be open. The first thing you want to do is you want to have signage up reminding that non-cohabitating patrons must remain 6 feet apart in and out of the water. Having a pool attendant is one way to help enforce this. Knowing what your bather load is another way to help know if you've got too many people in the pool or not. Taping off areas of the deck and creating family zones and single zones. I'm going to show you some examples of that in a few slides. Placing the furniture in these zones. Displaying a furniture map in the pool area. I'm going to show you what that looks like in a minute too. Or you can have a bring your own furniture policy, and a number of communities are starting to do this because it it kind of gets rid of the issue of having to sanitize the furniture between usage. And if you do that, we suggest that you lock your existing furniture. So in other words, if your existing furniture is sitting out on the deck, you may want to put a cable lock on it so that the patrons don't start grabbing it and setting it out willy-nilly on the deck. So those are our physical distancing strategies. Let's go to the next slide. So how do we calculate bather load? And again, I want to emphasize this is not mandatory. This is to help you and us and whoever your pool company is manage the facility correctly. So method one is probably the easiest and the one that we're favoring. Basically, you want to follow your county health department code calculation. So what you want to do here is look up your county health code and calculate out what the bather code is or bather load is for your pool. You may already have that posted at the pool, so that may save you a little bit of work because it's supposed to be posted on the pool risk sign. And then simply multiply that by 25%, meaning a 75% reduction. That seems to be a good best practice from what we're hearing in other places around the country. But again, you know your association better than us. So if you're a smaller association or a busier association in what your normal bather load is, you may want to adjust that some. But 25% is a pretty good rule of thumb. Method two is to follow the Pool and Hot Tub Alliance method, and there's a link to that at the end of the presentation. But basically, it involves calculating out square footage for water space and for deck space for furniture. You want to calculate your bather load considering that everyone may be on the deck or in the pool at one time. So in other words, if there's thunder, everyone may get out of the pool and be on the deck at the same time. Or if the lifeguard has to perform a rescue, they're going to blow the whistle and clear the pool and everybody has to get out at the same time. Or if it's just a hot day, everybody might want to be in the pool at the same time. So make sure you're considering your bather load as if everyone is in the pool and as if everyone is on the deck. All right, let's go to the next slide. So here's a sample pool map. This this is very rudimentary. It doesn't have to be fancy. This is what one of our clients put together, and we're sharing that with you to take a look. But you can see the drawing of the pool, where the tables are set up, and they've got spots labeled for how many people can sit at each table. So this is really helpful for both the members and the pool staff to know where furniture is supposed to be in the event that it's not sitting where it's supposed to be and somebody wants to help and put it back where it needs to be. It can also resolve disputes if somebody moves the furniture where it's not supposed to be. It gives you something to reference at the pool as to who's right and who's wrong on where you can set your chair. You can also combine this strategy with the bring your own furniture policy and deck markings, which we're going to look at, I believe, on the next slide. So this is what one client did, and I got to say I love this. I'm a big fan of this. They've got a very detailed map, and they've got it drawn out. And you can see the red zones. They've got that posted at the pool, and then you can actually see it done with tape on the pool deck on the picture to the left there. And each zone has its own name. So how fun is that, right? If you sign up online for a reservation, are you reserving the Cancun spot or the Hawaii spot or Belize or Trinidad or Tahiti, or I mean, who doesn't want to go to those places, right? So I love what they're doing here. They're having fun and coming up with a great strategy to physically distance. And you'll notice the signs there in the bottom left of the screen where they've also posted the capacity for each of those zones. So in the Tahiti zone, the max capacity is 2 people. The kiddie pool zone, the max capacity is 4 people. So these are great reminders to have right there on the deck to help your patrons know what they're supposed to be doing at the pool when they're socially distancing. Let's go ahead to the next slide. So here's the big question. How do you enforce it? Well, it's not so easy, especially if you don't have staff at your pool. But basically what we are supposed to enforce is that no groups larger than 10, unless they are 6 feet, 6 feet can be maintained between non-cohabitating individuals, should be at the pool. So you can have a pool attendant or a gate attendant or gate monitor, however you want to call it, and that person can assist with this, but that is expensive. Let's face it, you're paying a staff member there, and not every community can afford that. So what are some other options? Well, some communities have video cameras up that show the pool area. If you do have that, who's monitoring? Perhaps with video cameras, one suggestion that I've heard is that somebody could log on hourly and just check how are things going at the pool. And if there's a problem and a party's breaking out at the pool, then a board member needs to go down there and break it up. Now, granted, that's a lot of responsibility to take on the board, and we'll get into how that can be delegated perhaps in future slides, but that's just one strategy to consider. I've been asked about what about he said, she said disputes. So if somebody accuses somebody else of not physically distancing at the pool, how can you as a board resolve that? Well, if you've got video, you can review that and you can determine what's going on there. Certainly you can issue a warning to those individuals that are involved in any altercation or dispute. And honestly, if it continues, I think as a board, the responsible thing to do is to tell the community, look, if y'all can't behave, we're going to have to close the facility. And then you might have to close the facility if it comes to that. But hopefully people get the message and act responsibly if you have to give that message. So we get a lot of questions about games. Can people play games at the pool? Well, yes, they can if they're done with physical distancing. So for instance, if you've got racing, let's say a relay race in the pool or something, certainly that can be done with physical distancing. If you've got a team event, maybe you can, or team game, siblings can be on the same team so that they're not worried about physical distancing. Or Star is a great game that I know my kids love to play, where you say the name of the movie, or you say the initials of the movie, and the other kids are on the opposite side. They have to guess the movie, and it's a racing game across the pool. So, but games like Sharks and Minnows, Marco Polo, where you may actually be coming into physical contact with other players, may not be possible during this period of physical distancing. Keep in mind that the code, or not the code, but the executive order and the guidance is not really wanting us to be militant about this. It's not worried about or concerned about incidental or transitory groups happening. So if Mrs. Jones walks by Mrs. Smith on the way to the restroom and comes within 6 feet and says hi and stops to ask how the kids are doing for 30 seconds, that's not maybe something that we're going to be overly worried about. But we do want to try to prevent groups from coming together and not physical distancing and spending a lot of time together. Local authorities can issue warnings and citations, and basically that's what we've been hearing from the counties, is that if it becomes a concern at your pool, you can call the police. They will come out. Typically, they're first going to issue a warning. If it continues, they may issue a citation, and the violation of the physical distancing executive order is a misdemeanor. So that is something that you could be penalized with, either the people breaking that rule, or possibly the association if you're not making an effort to control that in some way. So let's go to the next slide. Now here is what you absolutely do not want to do. Over Memorial Day weekend, you may have seen in the news, Lake of the Ozarks had a giant pool party at some bars, and they took a lot of heat for this, and rightfully so. You can see in the picture there that there's a sign up that says, please practice social distancing, and nobody in that picture is practicing social distancing. So this is inviting liability. I definitely would not recommend this. So you want to make sure that your patrons and residents understand that this type of behavior is not acceptable, and if this goes on, then you are going to have to close the pool down and basically ruin everybody's fun. So let's go to the next slide. So next requirement in the and recommendation, I should say, in the guidance is the sanitation guidelines. And this can be very confusing, so I'm going to try to clarify this as much as possible, and I'm sure we'll get some questions about this as well, though. But basically, you have to clean and disinfect high-touch surfaces regularly, at least once daily. So this includes things like door handles, handrails, play structures, anything that would be touched on a frequent basis. Those are going to be your high-touch surfaces, and the requirement, I believe, is at least once a day, more often if possible. Also, you should clean and sanitize bathroom and shower areas regularly throughout open hours, and consider the usage. So here the guidance gives you a little bit of leeway. It suggests that you should do it at the before opening each day and during the day as available. And it says, consider the usage. And here again, you know your pool better than anybody. Some pools get very limited usage. Some pools get very busy, so you may need more frequent cleaning at busier pools. The next bullet is clean and disinfect shared objects between usage. So here we're talking about lounge chairs, tabletops, drinking fountains, kickboards, noodles, toys, and floats, all of your lost and found stuff. So this is where it gets a little tricky and why you want to think about what your lost and found policy is going to be, because these are supposed to be disinfected between each usage. So what most clients are doing that are opening, what we're seeing is they are advising their residents that they need to bring their own disinfectant with them and disinfect before and after the surfaces that they are using and the personal objects or the shared objects that they are using. That is certainly a one viable way to meet or attempt to meet that guidance. Discouraging sharing of personal items like goggles, snorkels, nose clips, things like that. Hopefully people aren't doing that, but here again, this is kind of a lost and found issue. If those things are sitting in your lost and found, you can pretty much guarantee that somebody's kid is going to go up and pick it up and put it on. So think about how you want to handle that. Diving boards and slides. We get a lot of questions about these. So the guidance is a little vague, but our interpretation of the guidance is that these fall under one of the high touch surfaces, diving boards and slides. So those should be disinfected at least once a day or wiped down once a day. In all honesty, if you're getting on a diving board or a slide, I think you have a greater risk of picking up coronavirus from standing next to somebody too closely in line than you do from touching the surface like a handrail to pull yourself up on the diving board or to sit down in the water slide, because just mere seconds later your hands are going to be again in the water. But if you're not keeping physical distance in the queue, that could be a problem. So you want to think about how that's going to be enforced. That is one area where the lifeguards could potentially help enforcing physical distancing is in the queue. But in most cases, they're not going to be a big factor in enforcing physical distancing. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So what are some strategies for sanitization? Well, if you've got on-site maintenance staff, that's ideal. And this is going to work out great for private clubs that have maintenance staff that are on duty all the time, but not everybody has that luxury. So if you don't have that luxury, you might want to consider a third-party service. They're also ideal, and you will be able to transfer some of the liability to them for that, but also you're going to be looking at additional cost. And then finally, what a lot of communities are looking at is volunteers. Volunteers are definitely more cost feasible, but the big question is, what about liability? So we're going to talk about that in some future slides, so hold that thought. I know that's a hot button. So I want to reinforce what we've said earlier. Lifeguards and attendants can assist with routine cleaning and restocking, but not really sanitization. It's not something that they are professionally trained to do. They're not a professional maid service. They're trained to lifeguard or to be an attendant. And in most cases, let's be realistic here, we're talking about teenagers, and the standards that they have may not be the standards that most adults have. So do we really want to count on their standard for sanitization? Probably not. Let's see, next is instructing residents to bring their own supplies and cleaning before and after themselves. So I mentioned that earlier, and I think that is that's a viable strategy and one that you definitely want to kind of put on the residents for a number of reasons. But one is because it's kind of a big burden for the community to guarantee that there's going to be supplies there for everyone to use, particularly if somebody walks off with those supplies, and they are in short supply right now. You want to remind residents that they should only be using EPA registered disinfectants to clean. So you might want to put that in the newsletter to make sure that what the approved ones are. And there is a link at the end of this presentation with that information. The guidance says, if practicable, provide hand sanitizer and wipes, but this is not required. So if practicable, so basically if possible, it's a good idea, but I think they wrote it that way on purpose because they know that it's difficult to guarantee that that's going to be there at all times. One question that we get a lot about is, well, can we just close the restrooms and showers and the drinking fountains because those are high touch areas and we don't want to have to worry about them? And unfortunately, no, we can't. Those have to stay open per code. that is required in the code that they remain open. And think about it, logistically speaking, we don't want to tempt anybody to use the restroom in the pool where we have another problem. We want them to have a place to go and handle their business where they're supposed to. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So COVID-19 products that are now available, we have been working to make signage available. I think other pool companies have been doing the same. It's been a little bit difficult because there hasn't been a one set approved wording for everybody. I think each law firm in town has kind of come up with a slightly different wording, but it all covers about the same thing. So we selected one, and I'll show you that in a minute. But you want to have your COVID-19 rules as well as hand washing signs up in your restrooms to remind people to hand wash. Sanitizer and spray bottles are available through us. You can see an example of one. There's a sanitizer bottle with a hand pump, and then we also have it in a spray bottle form, so you can spray it on hands or surfaces. Sanitary wipes and dispensers, we've had trouble sourcing those. Those are currently on a 3 to 4 week back order. So if we do ask if anybody orders those, that there's a no return policy, because we can't return them after they've been ordered. And then for our lifeguarded customers, we are strongly recommending bag valve mask kits. And I'm going to show you more about that in a future slide here. But basically what that is it provides an additional layer of protection to prevent disease transmission between lifeguards and patrons either way, if a rescue has to be performed that involves rescue breathing or CPR. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So these are some examples of pool signage that we're recommending for proper hand washing, and also for the rules that now apply, including reminders of social distancing of 6 feet apart. Now, when the governor's executive order expires in 5 days, I think it is, we don't know if these requirements are going to go away, but we think it's highly unlikely that all of them will go away. Certainly the social distancing we think will probably stay. And even if it doesn't, our recommendation is that having these signs in place only helps protect the association by warning patrons as they enter. So let's go to the next slide. So let's talk about insurance considerations. We've gotten a lot of questions about this, and was on a webinar last week. There's a link to that webinar at the end here as well, where we had an insurance agent on for HOAs, and he provided some really helpful information. And basically, what we want to be aware of as associations is that your general liability policy most likely has an exclusion for infectious disease. So what does that mean? If somebody claims that they got sick from COVID-19 or anything for that matter at the pool, your policy is not going to pay for the defense of that claim. Now, the claim may be baseless and it will be difficult for that person to prove, but the association would have to bear the expense of defending that claim. And that is one of the biggest barriers to pools opening right now. A lot of associations are really giving pause to that thought. Do we want to take that on right now? So we're going to talk about that as further here as we go. The Dno policies, which those are the director and officer policies, protect board of directors members, and in most cases the community volunteers, but you want to check with your agent to be sure. And remember, we talked about earlier using volunteers and the liability associated. This is where I'm getting back to that. So if you're planning to use volunteers to help with either the enforcement of physical distancing or the sanitization requirements, you want to make it official. You want to form a committee. That committee should report to the board, and the board should officially authorize that committee in writing to assist with these duties. And if that is done in that manner, my understanding from is that most association work comp policies will cover your board of directors and volunteers if those above conditions are met. So that means if they were to get injured while they were cleaning something, or if there were an altercation at the pool or something like that, they would be covered. But check with your agent to be sure. Each policy is different. Now, for the pool company employees, our work comp insurance or your pool company's work comp insurance would cover their illnesses or injuries. So, for instance, if one of our lifeguards were to get sick or injured on the job, that would fall on our work comp, not on yours. But when it's a volunteer, you want to make sure from the community, you want to make sure that there is coverage for that. And that's why you want to go through those steps that I just covered. So let's go to the next slide. So let's talk about some more legal and insurance considerations. So it's still very early. Not a lot of pools have opened. The majority of community pools are closed here in the Metro Atlanta area and for certain across the United States. Georgia is leading the way as far as reopening and compared to many other states. So a lot of states are looking to us as to what's Georgia doing, how are they doing it, is it working, what's not working. So there's not a lot of information out there yet about claims of people getting sick at amenity properties and how those claims may or may not affect premiums. So it's a little early for that, but I would say something that you want to be tuned into throughout the season. Keep in mind that it's going to be a high burden of proof for a plaintiff who's bringing a claim of picking up coronavirus at your facility. They're going to have to prove that they got it there. And this newer information that has come out has shown that has kind of reconfirmed what the CDC has been saying all along, is that the primary means of transmission is through respiratory droplets from one person to the next. And that's why that social distancing or physical distancing of 6 feet is so important, because if somebody is breathing or speaking next to you, the droplets that may come out of their mouth typically will fall to the ground within 6 feet, so you don't have to worry about breathing those in. And then once they are on a surface, depending upon the study you look at, it may or may not be viable after that point for a period of time. So it's going to be a high burden of proof, but that doesn't mean that as an association, you still won't have to bear that expense to defend that claim. So we get a lot of questions about waivers as well. We are not attorneys, so again, ask your attorney. But waivers can help from the standpoint that they warn the residents of what the expected risks are, but they're not going to excuse the association from gross negligence. So if the association just opens without a plan in place, there's probably a good argument to say that that would be grossly negligent, and it's not going to look favorable for you as defending that claim. So then another question we get a lot is, can residents sue the board for not opening amenities? And here again, ask your attorney and check your bylaws. But in most cases, it's my understanding that the board of directors has the authority to close the amenities for the safety of the residents. And so long as you're operating with that and can demonstrate that that is your rationale and that it is reasonable to keep the facility closed, you're probably protected against losing a claim. Doesn't mean that somebody can't sue you, but you're probably not going to lose that suit. Okay, let's go to the next page. So credits. We are continuing to track unused staff hours, and we plan to issue credits in July and again in September for any hours that are unused. We've been getting a lot of questions from clients. Can they reallocate those hours? So we are going to allow each client a one-time free allocation of unused hours to later in the season. That is with the caveat that we're assuming that staff is available. At this point, we are still trying to get fully staffed. I'll touch on that in a minute. But we are allowing clients to kind of readjust their coverage if they prefer to do that instead of taking a credit. At this time, we are not offering any maintenance credits because we still don't have everybody through inspections. Once we get everybody through inspections, which we're estimating will be by roughly mid-June, we can take a look at that and evaluate for anybody who is wanting to keep their pool closed for the remainder of the season, if it would be possible to offer a credit, and that's going to be taken on a case-by-case basis. Now, for associations getting requests from the residents for a credit, that would be something you would need to check with your attorney. And as we said before, you can probably make a logical argument to close or keep the amenities closed for safety reasons. However, if most communities around you are opening and it may be a little more difficult for you to defend that unless you can demonstrate why it would be impossible for you, or why it would be very unlikely for you to be able to open safely. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So speaking of staffing, recruiting status has improved. I want to shout out to our clients, have been wonderful, referring people to us, and so we have been interviewing multiple people daily, signing up them for training and certification classes, which are underway. Things are moving in the right direction for sure. And I think from what I hear from most of my competitors, it's kind of the same thing, but all of us are still really hustling hard to get caught up and to get all staff in place. One thing that we are asking our clients to do before we place staff at your pool, please fill out that questionnaire with your operational plan. It's very important that we be able to train our staff on what your operational plan is and what to expect when they get there. We don't want our lifeguards or attendants to walk into a situation where they're not prepared and they don't know your policies, and an uncomfortable situation arises. Our staff are instructed to self-check their temperature before coming to work, as I mentioned before. So if they're 100.4 or higher, they're not going to be coming to work. So we ask clients to keep in mind that these temp checks may result in some last-minute shift holes where we're going to have to try to juggle and find staff to fill in. Our staff, we are giving them the option to wear a mask while they're on duty. And the reason we're doing this is because we are, number one, concerned for their safety. So we want them to have the option to wear it if they feel safer with it on. And number two, we want them to feel that they have the ability to take it off when needed if it becomes a distraction to them or difficult or hinders their ability to perform their duties. In particular, lifeguards, we want to make sure that if they are wearing a mask, that it's not becoming an issue for them to perform their duties, such as blowing their whistle or not fogging up their glasses with a mask on. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So our lifeguards are equipped with pocket masks to provide resuscitation. Those pocket masks have one-way valves and biological filters on them, which should, in theory, block viruses and bacteria from getting through. We are encouraging all of our customers to please consider buying BVM kits, which this is an example of a BVM you can see in the picture here, which provides that extra layer. So this way, the rescuer and the victim's mouth are not near each other, and there's much less of a risk of any disease transmission, whether it's coronavirus or anything else. And then finally, I threw just a quick mention in there in swim lessons. We're not really touching on that in this seminar, but I did want to mention if you are looking for guidance on swim lessons, Starfish Aquatics and Red Cross have some great information out there. In particular, Starfish has done a great job with this. You want to be sure that anybody providing swim lessons at your pool has insurance, particularly right now, and has a plan for how they're conducting instruction in a safe way and doesn't bring additional liability on you as an association. So if you see, I would develop a process for the board to approve any vendors who want to provide swim lessons at the pool to make sure that they are insured and have a good method for conducting lessons to minimize exposure. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So in conclusion, opening is achievable, but should be done cautiously. Stay tuned this week. We expect the governor to come out with another announcement. Whether it's an executive order or not, we don't know, but it's a fluid situation. So as I mentioned in the previous webinar, you got to be prepared for change. Make sure you're communicating with your community. A lot of folks are still in the dark about, why pools aren't opening, and they're hearing, well, this pool down the street opened, why can't we open? And so if you're not communicating with your membership, they could get frustrated and make it difficult on the board members and the property manager, and we don't want that. So make sure you're putting communication out there about that, advising them, that look, a plan has to be in place, and if you're concerned about opening and you want to contribute to that plan, by all means, show up for a board Zoom meeting and get on a committee and help put this plan together. Continue to maintain your pool no matter what, and then of course work with your pool company for a successful season. And I think is that our last slide? Do we have one more? Yeah, so this is our sources slide. The parting thought I will leave you with is if you are still thinking about staying closed all season, I would encourage you to wait at least until June and see what happens between now and early June, and what may or may not change here in the state of Georgia, because I know that Governor Kemp is trying to get things back to normal as quickly as possible. Not old normal, but I don't even want to say new normal. I hate hearing that. So, but I think we'll conclude with that and be happy to take questions through the remainder of the hour.